welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate everyone coming out here. I'm looking forward to this presentation. I hope you guys get something out of this positive. So that was a mouthful, as you can tell, but basically what I'm going to be talking about are showing students about interruptions, their effects, and techniques to mitigate. Find out what happens. Okay? So who am I? I am a graduate student at Colorado State University, which is located in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's about an hour north of Denver. I've been there about 2 years. Absolutely love it. Before that, I worked in industry at EA Sports. You may have heard of them. Spent a couple years there making games and having fun with that. And throughout my life, I've been a teacher. Teaching English in Spain, teaching English obviously in grad school, and even teaching tennis most of my career. So those are the three components that sort of make me up and what pushed me towards this area of research. So just to get sort of a vocabulary vernacular out of the way, because it's in the title, I'm going to talk about it a lot, memory cues and resumption strategies. They're basically a fancy name for techniques we use to refocus faster after breaks. And imagine, if we're programming, and programming is a great example because it's something that has a high cognitive load, and that's important because when you're balancing a bunch of stuff in your head and someone taps you on the shoulder, that can come crumbling down. So if you're debugging a program and you've got control loops, you've got variables, you've got all this logic balanced in your head, if you get interrupted, there's a cost to that. And if you have a way to sort of refocus faster, maybe that can help you. Okay? So why this topic? Why was I interested in it? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but there's one really good reason. The distractions everywhere. Okay? But let's be a little more serious about what it means. Think about where I came from. I came from industry where I had daily stand-ups, I had manager one-on-ones, I had God knows what other meetings, I had interruptions from colleagues, I had phone calls. My life was filled with interruptions. Anyone from industry can identify with that. Plus, I had to code. I mean, forget about all those interruptions. I had to actually produce on a weekly basis. So I had sort of talked to colleagues. I had sort of read some blogs and sort of found out, oh yeah, software engineers, when they get interrupted, yeah, maybe 15 minutes is what it takes for them to usually refocus back to where they were. Oh yeah, there are ways to mitigate that. And then when I came to graduate school, I actually started looking at the research, and I was blown away by the amount of research that had been done in this area. Multiple researchers have surveyed professional software engineers to hammer down that, yeah, it takes on average 15 minutes for an interrupted programmer to resume. They've done plenty of things about memory cues and resumption strategies, and this happens by educators, it has happened by HCI people, human-computer interaction, and it's also happened in the psychology community. So then I sort of sat there and I said, how come I didn't hear about this at all when I was an undergrad? That was sort of the question that popped in my mind. How come I didn't hear about it? I thought it would have been useful. Because that's what I faced and had to sort of cope with the first 8, 9, 10 months in industry. How do I manage all these things? So that's what's kind of going on with motivating me, to be honest. And God knows, I got a cell phone, a smartphone, if you can believe, for the first time 3 weeks ago. Within 2 hours, that thing was beeping me, buzzing me, vibrating me. And that was within 2 hours. I just added my contacts, and the thing just started blowing up. So I think personally our world is becoming more of a world that gets, flashing at you, which is why I think this is an interesting topic to pursue. So let's formalize kind of what we want to do, because now we want to do a study. So these are four kind of key questions and core questions in the research that we want to conduct. So question number one was, very trivial, but let's put it out there. Let's make sure students are interrupted. Okay, seems obvious, but it's always good to get that one out of the way. Find out what's their current knowledge about memory cues and resumption strategies. And then we want to ask them, okay, if we taught them about this stuff, introduced them to it, did they think it was useful? And then finally, we want to get their opinion on, okay, now you've seen this material, do you think it's something you'd like to learn in class? Something you'd like to learn in your curriculum? So this is a breakdown of our study. We had 200 participants. We had all four levels of, we had sophomores, freshmen, juniors, seniors. And it was basically a three-part study. The first part was we're going to give them a survey and get background information on them. Get an idea of what their current knowledge is, what their work practices are. Then what we're going to do is give them a 30-minute seminar, roughly, that introduces the concept of the effects of interruptions, techniques to mitigate. And then after that, they can ask questions and they can explore that if they want in the seminar. Then we're going to let them go back into the field, so to speak. And by doing so, we're going to let them go for about, in our case, 6 to 7 weeks, and then we're going to come back to them. Hopefully the people that thought it was useless will forget about it at that point. And we want to find out about that. We didn't want it to be fresh in their minds. We wanted some time to go by. So then after about 6 weeks, we got with them and we gave them another handout. We wanted to get another survey. And we wanted them to self-report on the effect of the seminar on their work. Did they notice a difference? Did they say, hey, I actually started applying some of these techniques? Oh, hey, I actually thought about it. Or, no, I didn't think about them, I thought they were useless. Oh yeah, what was that thing I did before? We want to get the whole sort of mix of things. So, what did we find? So, the first thing we found was distractions was a top contributor to productive or unproductive work. That's promising. They also said that clear requirements were a big problem. So if you're writing assignments, students hate big assignments. So just an FYI. But what we looked at and said, okay, students are saying one of the biggest problems are distractions. That seems reasonable. That's sort of going with our thought process, so we're encouraged by that. We also kind of saw focus. I'm not 100% willing to chalk that up as the same thing as being distracted, but maybe that's something that could be helped by learning about these things as well. I certainly won't say that about state of mind and mood. God knows, my girlfriend just broke up with me. I don't know, she went out official on Facebook, whatever. I mean, I don't want to characterize what that one is. But certainly distractions and focus are things that we look to target with memory cues and resumption strategies. So we asked them, have you heard of these things before? And about 3/4 of them said no, they hadn't. And more interestingly, in my opinion, the quarter that did never cited a computer science class as where they learned about it. Most of them learned about it in a psychology class, or talking to colleagues, or because they had an internship. But none of them got it from a computer science class. And then we said, okay, explicitly they might not know about these things, but implicitly they might do this stuff already. So we asked them also, okay, when you get up from your desk to go to the bathroom or pick up some food or do whatever, do you do anything before you get up that helps you refocus when you come back? In essence, we defined what a memory cue or resumption strategy is, but we didn't state it implicitly. We didn't use that term. Because students, a lot of these guys do it implicitly. Almost half didn't do anything. So they just get up and leave, cold turkey. And the next most popular response was leaving comments. That's more reasonable. Leave a little breadcrumb for myself to understand where I am and maybe hopefully refocus a little bit more when I come back. So that's sort of some of the demographic information and habit information we got from these students. Now, the topics, we basically give them a seminar, like I said, it's 30 minutes. There are a lot of topics covered. It's a breadth idea, not going into depth. We just want to introduce them to a number of ideas. And I would love to go over all of them, because I think they're all equally interesting, but because of time, I'm only going to point out a couple. The first one I want to point out to the bottom is roadblock cue. Roadblock cue is a term that was coined, I don't know if Chris Parnan, this is where I first read it first, in a paper by Chris Parnan. I don't know if he coined the phrase, but an example of a roadblock cue is, before I get up to leave from my desk, I'm going to put in a compile error in my code, even if there wasn't an error to begin with. So that all I have to do when I sit back is remember, hit the compile button. And in doing so, I'm hoping that that error that's produced will focus me into the part of code that will jog my memory, help me regain that context of where I was and what I was doing. So I thought that was a cool one, okay? The other one is right below it, one right below that, which is selective suspension. And Hemingway was famous for this. Hemingway said whenever he wrote, he never stopped writing after he finished a chapter. Always started writing the next chapter. Because in his head, he had this larger narrative that he wanted to map out. And in particular, he certainly knew where he wanted to go after that chapter that he wrote. So he always felt it was better to start writing because he knew where that narrative was going. And many of us, myself certainly, I always think, well, that's a natural break, I'm going to stop. But Hemingway said, no, that's actually a false friend. If you stop there, that natural break will actually harm you more when you sit back down to write, because you have less context to grab onto when you resume. So I thought that was a real interesting one. I think all of these are real interesting, but again, I just want to cover a couple of them. But that's what we covered. If you have questions, feel free to ask me in the Q&A. So we did the seminar. Now we're going to do the follow-up. The follow-up questionnaire was broken up into two sections. We had 6 continuous rating scale questions, which is a big mouthful, but all it is we gave them a line and allowed them to mark wherever they fell from the line. We did that because we wanted continuous values to do a statistical analysis on the results. So if they were to go far left, near the 0, that means highly negative. If they want to go to the right, that's highly positive. All right, so that's all that is. And then we asked them some 4 written questions, like, did you do anything differently? If so, what did you do? So what did we find out from those? So, hope you digest that while I drink. I want to point out a couple. So, we asked them 6 questions to answer with these continuous rating scale questions. Obviously, 5 would be neutral, essentially. So they found it positive, that they found it useful. And I just want to point out what's interesting about these is the medians for all these values are actually higher than the means slightly. So most of our outliers tended to be on the low end. Generally that 25% of people that had already heard of this stuff and knew it. But what's funny is all the people were very positive about, hey, I'll use them. Hey, I think they should be incorporated. And those are the 2 things I wanted to point out that we thought were the most interesting. Is when we asked them, hey, did you find this stuff useful? Or rather, would you consider using them? Which is the 4th one. They were pretty strongly in favor of that. And even more strongly, out of all the questions, they said, hey, would you want this stuff incorporated into your courses at some level? That's very vague. We haven't hammered down what that means, but just at that level, they said, yeah, we'd be interested. So those are the 2 strong results from the continuous scale questions. Now from the written, here are 2 great examples. The top one's an example of basically a student restating a definition of what a memory cues and resumption strategy is working as advertised. I learned some new things that basically helped me refocus fast when I came back. Cool. At the bottom, we've got a student who basically is saying, hey, I think this stuff should be included. So that's, in our opinion, pretty cool. Now, what I don't want to say is, okay, it's the problem is solved, everyone's got to go out and teach this stuff. I'm not saying that. We're far from that. The way we interpret these results is it's a great conversation starter. And it's something worth pursuing with more research. There's a lot of open questions, I think, out there that you could pursue in this avenue. And I like to call it programming as a craft. I mean, writers in English courses, they're familiar with writer's block and they talk about it because they talk about the creative process as much as they talk about the techniques of refining good prose, persuasive prose, and excellent writing. And my personal feeling is in the sciences, in general, we tend to focus on the technical, well, not minutia, but the technical concepts, and we don't talk about the creative process that's involved. Programming is a creative process. It requires critical thought. It requires coming up with a creative answer. I got into it because I like playing with Legos. And now suddenly I was like, oh, I get to build a bridge and you're giving me the pieces, but you don't give me the instructions. And that to me is the beauty of what we do. So I think a little more thought and embracing, hey, it's a creative process, and helping students with that is worthwhile. But again, this is a conversation starter. Certainly, we don't know what the seminar topics should be. We just picked some, and we made sure they were the same for all of them. But for all we know, there's a much better set or subset of topics that would really, the students would rather find most beneficial. So that's something that can be explored. And then the other thing is, there's this growing movement that's very cachet right now in the psychology community called the science of learning. And there's psychologists out there that want to introduce classes at the 100 level, the freshman level, that may or may not be obligatory, but could basically help students learn about, this is what happens when this is what happens with my brain to learn. These are things that I can do to help leverage the mechanics of my brain. And there's a bevy of research there that's pretty general. And I think that it might be interesting to take what they're studying over there and incorporate it into the specifics of computer science. So that's another avenue that I think is out there that could be pursued. So, with that being said, and I know Jim's good with time, enjoy that, because I'm a big Calvin House fan, as you can imagine. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions, so.
Yes?
How did you choose the techniques that you included in the seminar? Did you look at the literature in psychology and then look at combinations of techniques or individual?
So you're talking about where we compiled the seminar topics from.
Yes.
That was primarily done through our literature review and doing interviews with colleagues in industry and in academia. That was done at an informal level. So that's why I said the seminar topics could be explored more thoroughly. I wouldn't say we used much rigor. We just said the idea is get the students thinking about this stuff. We don't have to cover all of them. We don't have to necessarily identify what the best ones are, but just tell them about, hey, interruptions cost people generally 15 minutes, and hey, people have dealt with that, and here's what they do. Maybe you'll find it useful. Yes, sir?
You flashed them by real quick. I teach in a classroom. Is there like a place where you just have a list of all these strategies? Just like
yes,
a grab bag?
It's, so because of space requirements, I didn't fit them in the paper.
Gotcha.
But there's a link at the bottom of the page that goes to my personal website that has a section that is literally what I cut out, which is a description part by part of each of those things. So what I'd love to talk about that I sort of skipped over, I have a description. That's noahjohn.us. Okay? Yes?
On a similar note, the seminar that you gave, are there slides available from that seminar that somebody could just take and start using if they wanted to try that?
No, actually, we didn't produce slides. I was the one giving the seminar. I generally steer away from PowerPoint as a personal thing, but I know they said you have to be PowerPoint. Like, oh, I like to just wave my hand. But hopefully the description on my personal website will give more color, but also Jamie and myself, Jamie's my advisor who collaborated with me on this, Jamie Rees, we were thinking that we could turn that into what would be like a module and have that online, much to what you're saying, where okay, now an instructor can take that module and use that. And yeah, that's okay. Hey, then I can walk around more, wave my hands. Yes?
I noticed that one of the low scores on your results was students feeling like they could apply this outside the discipline.
Yeah.
Did you explore why that was as a follow-up?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Were your techniques focused on CS, and so that's why they didn't feel like they could apply it?
The techniques were focused on CS. The reason that question was there is when we conducted a pilot study prior to our main user study, and we had 15 students, and they were actually even more positive across everything, including outside of class. So we kept it in there, thinking that's interesting, but we didn't change the seminar. We didn't generalize it. We kept it specific to computer science. And when we had 200 students across 4 class levels, then we found that a lot of them didn't find it useful. I mean, it was below 5. So I think I would attribute that to how we got our pilot study students. They were volunteers, and in my opinion, volunteers in our situation were probably more likely to be enthusiastic about new things. And then when we went out to 200 students, you had a better strata of the student population in computer science. So it's interesting. I thought it would have been useful, but maybe it's just how we framed it in the seminar, because it was computer science specific. Yeah?
So one of the problems that you often find with students is they feel like they're learning, gaining knowledge, but then they don't actually start applying it. So I'm wondering if you're planning on doing a follow-up where you're going to actually not just look at the self-reports to see what they think of it, but to see are they actually able to apply it, and if they do or do not, why?
Sure. I mean, I showed you a very limited snippet of the feedback, But there was feedback where, again, this is self-reporting. We didn't put a camera at their cube or in their dorm room, which, some people do in industry studies. They'll actually monitor this. I'm not going to take your self-reporting. I'm going to study you and go through hours of footage and evaluate what you're actually doing. The students in this case, they reported, in addition to what I showed you, kind of details of what they did. We said, okay, what did you do differently? And they kind of, laid out different things, like I leave more comments for myself, or a very interesting one was they actually started telling me that, oh, I learned that by listening to music, the fact that I listen to music when I study primes my brain now for studying. So now I make sure I always listen to the same music. So I had a student that listened to the Batman soundtrack. And then he's like, oh, I'm ready to do this, because he's like a superhero. But, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And when I looked it up, I was like, oh, there's some actually truth in that. That was a student actually going out and verifying on his own, I think it was a he in this case, but validating, finding something on his own and then applying it. So I thought that was a pretty cool result. But to your point, yes, that could be fleshed out more, because that's the drawback to self-reporting. You're dealing with what the person is writing, and maybe if we observe it, we write something different.
Time for one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite bug to put in as the work log?
Any favorite? I mean, I personally don't use that technique, and I would think, based on my reading, it's entirely dependent on the context of your work. If you're working with file I/O, hopefully you would do something along those lines where it's going to spit out an error that, again, helps you regain the context of, oh, I'm working with file I/O, not working with, bit manipulation and strings.
Sneak one more. Yep. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I want to be a little lazy and make up this.
Yeah.
So was the seminar geared specifically towards this particular class, or was it students who were programming language, or students who were
I had 5 professors in 5 classes open the doors to their classroom to basically give this seminar to their students. So I gave it to freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So that, yeah, we can take it offline. Go ahead.
So did you compare students at different levels?
Yes, I did. And that's in the paper. No difference in the results, which was interesting because I was convinced first year sophomores would react the best. I was like, oh, they're not doing baby assignments, so they've learned a little bit, and then they'll appreciate it. The seniors are all cynical and want to graduate. That's what I thought. But they were the same. But the statistical difference, what was statistically significant, was the difference between students that had heard of memory cues and did not hear about memory cues. There was a statistical significance with that. Those guys did rate it lower. But, like I pointed out, everyone was the same in terms of I will consider using them, and I think they should be incorporated in curriculum. Okay? Guys, thank you so much. You've been a great audience.